by acknowledging that we are on stolen ground. Unceded Ohlone land, to be precise. To thank them for thousands of years of living in respect for and reciprocity with this place. I also invite you to take information after today's performance about how you can help them fight to protect their sacred sites and join their campaign to raise enough to be able to reacquire their own land through purchase.
Okay.
An ancient Hindu story tells of a time when the gods were at a loss. The demons who'd been destroying the universe could not be defeated. They'd been fighting them for eons. People couldn't see the demons the way the gods did. Their bloodshot eyes, claws, and fangs looked to human beings like greed, fear, rage, jealousy, narcissism, and deceit. Now the gods were stroking their beards, clearing their throats. It's time. It's time. They lay in a circle the size of the Milky Way. Their heads were the rim of the circle, their feet the hub. Out of that hub sprang the warrior goddess Durga.
Yeah.
Radiant in her fierce beauty, robed in red, she rode a tiger. Each of her 1,000 arms held a weapon. With one glance at the earth, she went to work, slaying demons everywhere, until all of them had been freed of their illusions and could go back to the cosmic dance, except one. This demon's blood became yet another demon the moment it touched the ground. So, Durga created yoginis, tiny female spirit warriors who lapped up every drop of blood before it could touch the earth. At last, all the demons were defeated. The earth and her children were saved. If ever we needed Durga, right? It's today. Feminine spirit warriors may be our only hope. I'm not talking female here. People of all genders hold the feminine.
Amen.
The life-giving, creative, web-weaving, mama bear protective archetype that we need now.
Yeah.
What's stopping us? What's holding us back? I need to talk now to my white sisters. In the face of the racism, misogyny, heterosexism, and transphobia, economic injustice, and environmental disaster that we're facing now, where are we white women? I'm not saying that women, people of all races, aren't the spirit warriors we need. We need everyone. But when my friends of color ask in anguish and rage, what's wrong with white women? Robbie wants to know. I have to admit that even after years of practice, I have to work at not getting defensive, not going all white fragile and making it about me. Here's the deal. In 2016, a huge percentage, maybe even a majority, of American white women voted for an unqualified, bigoted, racist, narcissistic sexual predator instead of a woman. 2/3 of the white women in Alabama voted for Roy Moore, a child molester. Betsy DeVos is not the only white woman who identifies with and wants to protect the rights of rapists instead of their victims. I have to ask why. What makes women identify with men, especially abusive men? And what role does racism play in that for us as white women? It's not a new phenomenon. The early suffragists who campaigned on a promise that women being morally superior to men would usher in peace, justice, and apple pie when we won the vote, abandoned and betrayed black women in pursuit of their own agenda. The second wave of feminism in the 1970s, by focusing entirely on upper and middle class women with access to higher education, committed sins of omission as serious as their foremothers' sins of commission. And lest we think we've come a long way, baby, need I remind us that not all pussies are pink? So it's January 21st, 2017. I'm finally emerging from the bowels of Lake Merritt BART station, where I've been trapped forever because there's so many of us. This gives me so much hope. All of us together, we will turn around what happened in November through resistance and organizing.
Yes.
And wait, what's going on here? A whole bunch of white women are waving and pointing at the police helicopters that are surveilling us. Then there are those here and there that are boasting about how our march is peaceful. I want to scream. Where have you been? When black and brown young people are killed by the police? When dreamers are carted off by ICE? When the Lakota are tear gassed and fire hosed into sub-freezing temperatures for protecting the sanctity of water? Those helicopters are not our friends. And that smiling cop on the corner may not act that way when confronted with a crowd that doesn't look like us, no matter how peaceful they are. This I know from personal experience. If I said to you, your behavior is racist, would you be shocked and offended? Or would you listen? It's like I once had to testify before the Metropolitan Transit Commission when they were yet again taking money from urban bus lines to serve the wealthy white suburbs where most of them live. We've been taught to think of racism as individual vile acts perpetrated against someone because of the color of their skin. But the truth is, most racism is systemic,
Amen.
institutional,
Good.
unconscious, and for those of us who are not targeted, odorless, tasteless, and invisible. A kind of cultural carbon monoxide. And just as deadly. That's why Rosa Parks chose buses. In the midst of the indignities and impositions and terrorism that was Jim Crow, she chose buses to spark a revolution. Because public transit is like a web that creates and maintains community. Without it, there's no access to opportunity or anything else. These rooms tend to be decorated with large transit maps, brightly colored webs of bus lines. One afternoon, as some bureaucrat yammers on, I'm looking at this web of bus lines and it hits me. This web is broken because the web that it incarnates was torn asunder thousands of years ago. The violent rending of the web of interdependence, of reciprocity, of life itself, that began in this hemisphere in 1492, was not the beginning. It was a result. Europeans who wrote glowingly of the people they met in the lands they'd invaded as generous, happy, and free, and therefore perfect for exploitation, were clearly already severed from any sense of the sacred interconnection of all life. That illness only grew with the gold they stole here and the agricultural technology they learned here, because that empowered them to go on to rape and enslave the rest of the world, creating genocide here, the Middle Passage slave trade, imperialism, capitalism, industrialization, the long road to the world we live in today, where 8 white men have as much money as half the human race combined, where corporations with the help of the World Bank and IMF work to maintain that distribution, even make it worse, by commercializing water, by stealing land and burning rainforests for palm oil plantations, by patenting seeds and natural medicines, by insisting on pulling the last drop of those dinosaur remains out of the earth, even though we know burning fossil fuels is giving our mother a life-threatening fever, where humanity has become the equivalent of that meteor that struck the planet 65 billion years ago, being responsible for an equivalent number of species extinctions, where the polar ice caps melt so fast we can watch islands being swallowed up while polar bears drown. Where on the same day, armed white men who had taken over public land go free, while unarmed Native Americans and their allies are attacked with military and chemical weapons for protecting the sanctity of water. The web is in tatters. Human life, and many other species as well, dangles precariously over the void. The web is also tangled. This time, we didn't tangle it by consciously practicing to deceive. We were born into it, as were our ancestors for millennia, or at least centuries, depending on whether we're talking about patriarchy or racism. These threads were originally part of the sacred web of life, of interconnection, connecting us to each other, to the rest of creation, to Mother Earth, to the divine feminine. Once broken, they become something else entirely. And our unconscious bias, privilege, and internalized superiority about our lack of melanin, combined with our internalized patriarchy and inferiority about our gender identity, creates a tangle that stunts us, kills people of color, and threatens the planet that makes all life as we know it possible. In restorative justice, we say, hurt people, and healed people, heal people. If I truly believe this, I need to look at the generational trauma, not just of those who are oppressed, but of their oppressors. In this case, European-descended white folks, me. Not to make any excuses, but so we can begin the process of facing and naming so that the healing can begin. After thousands of years of violent, brutal European history, European American elites invented the concept of race. When European-descended indentured servants and African-descended enslaved folks realized they had more in common with each other than with their masters. Now, lest we forget that racism is not just a black-white issue, it's important to point out that the fight was over who got the land they'd just stolen from the Native Americans. The solution? Give poor European-descended people a payoff. They got paid off in whiteness through a series of laws granting them privileges denied to the people from Africa. As both W.E.B. Du Bois and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. have pointed out, we're still being paid off in whiteness. As in, maybe I can't feed my kids tonight, or I may not be able to send my children to the colleges of their choice, but at least we're not one of them. White women are half the people being paid off. And we're doing so from a position more precarious than that of white men. One that leaves us vulnerable to taking marching orders from those men on the way to the voting booth. So one of these threads is that of thousands of years of patriarchy and internalized misogyny. Let's begin in the mythological beginning. I don't know what my ancient pagan European ancestors told each other about how it all began. I do know that a story about a woman and a garden was imposed on them. You know the drill. God gets lonely, so he makes Adam, who gets lonely. So he makes Eve out of Adam's rib. At first, they're blissfully and innocently happy in their garden, Eden, where they're set apart, given dominion over the rest of creation. They get to name everybody else. You're an elephant, giraffe. You're a mosquito. I know, mosquitoes wouldn't bite in Eden, so sue me. There's just one big no-no. Do not eat fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. When the serpent, not coincidentally a symbol of the goddess, convinces Eve with, afraid you will be as powerful as she is. And Eve convinces Adam with just a taste. They're expelled from the garden. She is cursed with giving birth to big-headed babies in pain and suffering. Is blamed for all the suffering in the world. And is commanded with Adam to subdue the wilderness. Subjugation, domination, even stewardship rips us out of this web of life, sets us apart, makes our very young species think we're in charge, like we own the planet, as if she were a thing and not our living mother. Once we're separated like that, it's easy to create systems of subjugation and domination everywhere, including within our own species. Which leads us to the threads of racism, superiority, privilege. At 7 years old, there's not much I like about moving to Seattle. I miss my grandma and grandpa and cousins and aunts and uncles. I hate the rain and having to be quiet inside every day so my daddy can sleep because he works nights. One thing I like, TV. They don't have it where I came from yet. Wanda reads us stories. Stan Morrison sings silly songs and shows us cartoons, and plus his dogs. Slow motion and no motion. They're basset hounds. Long bodies, short legs, really long ears. But I don't like watching TV news anymore. Mrs. Parks and Dr. King are my heroes because I know what they're fighting for is right. So, I don't get it. I don't understand. Why are people so mean? They shoot fire hoses at kids and old people. these sick, vicious dogs on them, hit them with sticks. The pictures on my TV are just different grays, but I can tell the people with the hoses and the dogs and the sticks look like me. Sometimes I cry. I'm so confused. My folks can't even explain it. They know everything. It's not fair. Fast forward 40 years or so. I'm working in a program for educators on issues of oppression and inclusion. Every year, my friend Donald, brilliant, black, tall, gorgeous gay man, and Matt Damon's high school English teacher. He uses his 3 allotted sentences on what he wants for allies against racism the same way. Number 1, I am not a minority. There is nothing minor about me. Number 2, white women, stop being nice. Number 3, white women, stop being polite. And every year I squirm. Every year I promise myself I'll do better. I'll use my privilege to dismantle it every chance I get. Sometimes I do speak out with all the passion I feel. Sometimes I let the confusion and shock of that 7-year-old tangle my tongue and bind my throat. Did he really say that? Is she gonna go there? How do I begin to argue with this pile of assumptions? Some of these are historical amnesia and silencing. So far, I don't like 3rd grade very much. I miss Miss Ale. Once she laughed because I said, "Why did you leave some of the spelling words off the test?" This teacher doesn't even smile. Oh no. I have to read out loud in front of the whole class to decide what reading group I'll be in. See, Dick, James played with Spot. Last year, when I figured out boys could be popular and smart, but girls had to choose, I chose smart. I'm a good reader. I don't deserve to be in the middle reading group just because my voice cracked. I'm the frog that lives in Marcia's throat. You can call me Pat. Full name, Patriarchy. I'm not one of those enchanted princes in disguise. Don't even think about kissing me. Blah! Girl cooties. Every time she has to talk in front of more than 2 people, I appear. When she tries to get rid of me with those pathetic little I come right back. You hate me. What do I care? I'm here for your own good. I'm keeping you safe. It's dangerous. I pity girls get in trouble. You don't need that kind of trouble. She just doesn't get it. It's dangerous to be a girl with opinions and a loud voice. I'm constantly having to frog-splain this to her. Sisters, when did you first consciously realize it? I was slow. Took me till junior high. I'm nicely and politely waiting for the school bus to take me home. I can feel my cheeks burn, remembering that when I was sent to the principal's office after being falsely accused of littering last week. I'm also watching a group of junior high boys act like junior high boys. And it hits me like a slap upside the head. They don't have to be nice. They don't care what we think of them. They don't have to. What would that be like? That's not for you to know. The process of claiming my own voice took a long time because visibility was scary. Anger at the betrayal of the country I had been taught I was living in gave me strength. Going directly from high school English, where we're reading Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, to U.S. history, where we're learning about the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. It was learning that the racism I'd seen as police dogs and fire hoses was not confined to the South and had other faces, many of them. It was meeting someone who was in the Gulf of Tonkin when that so-called incident was supposed to have happened. That was the excuse for our escalation of the Vietnam War. Hell no, we won't go! Si se puede! Boycott grapes and lettuce. I'm a working class kid and a child of the 60s. Don't call me a hippie. I didn't even know Woodstock was happening because I was too busy pulling boards off a belt in a lumber mill. Besides, hippies are all into dropping out and creating alternatives instead of fighting what is, something it will take me decades to come to appreciate. I march, carry placards, join vigils, do mailings. I never step up to leadership or make speeches. I'm still here and brought some friends. A few years later, I'm a new mom in a new place. We're La Leche League, a support group for women doing that radical, countercultural thing called breastfeeding, is my only community. That's where I learn about infant formula abuse.
Come on now.
About 6 to 9 million babies dying every year from malnutrition and dehydration. Because infant formula manufacturers are using vile, misleading, and racist ad campaigns to convince mothers in the most exploited countries of the world to give up breastfeeding for their superior product, even though those moms don't have enough money to pay for them or clean water to dilute them with. The first issue of Mother Jones magazine just arrived. They have donated their back page ad space to a brand new organization. In fact, Infant Formula Action Committee. 5 Milwaukee housewives and La Leche League members are calling for a boycott of Nestle. Count me in. I sit back to wait for somebody nearby to start a chapter so I can join. And wait. If there's going to be a Nestle boycott here, it will be because I started. Terror of leadership and speaking out. 6 to 9 million dead babies. I get a copy of the film Bottle Babies from Lilechevy. I speak in church basements, conferences, wherever anybody will listen. Talk my friend who's in local TV news into interviewing me on the air. Terror can't compete with passion. I take on other causes. Once being interviewed on the air with a big red nose because I just come from a clown communion service and I forgot. It didn't matter. My final political act before leaving the Pacific Northwest was to testify before the Oregon State Legislature for reparations for Japanese Americans interned during World War II. There's a new movement. You might have heard of it. Feminism, women's liberation. I'm torn. Justice, equity, of course, but it feels weird to fight for my own rights. Is that okay? I mean, for women who are constantly told to take care of everyone else, this might be a sign of why we need liberating. But if I'm honest, my altruistic qualms about fighting for my own rights floats in a deep well of fear. This thread is a big one. The burning times and loss of European connection to the earth, the divine feminine. It's one of the major threads that is part of our generational trauma as oppressors. I believe that this unacknowledged history is a big part of what binds our throats and tangles our tongues. So few people know about the burning times. When, depending on who you believe, 100,000 or 9 million women were burned at the stake, imprisoned, tortured for being healers and midwives, spiritual leaders, powerful for being witches. The year is 1491. Somewhere in Europe, Jane speaks. It's nearing Midsummer Eve, and I can't find the plants I need for the ritual. My store of raspberry leaf and nettle also dwindled. Yet I have 3 women due before the next moon. How can I midwife without medicine? It gets harder and harder to find the plant helpers we need since the greedy lords gobbled up all the lands we used to hold in common. But it's even harder to find a place where we can do the rituals without getting caught. I can never escape the terrified shrieks of my friends being burned alive, of the men whose only crime is loving another man, are used like bundles of sticks and leaves, a common faggot, to set her body on fire with his.
Wow.
Even worse are the instruments of torture. How can people who talk about a God of love create such things? If I were faced with that horror they call the Iron Maiden, the Iron Maiden was an instrument of torture shaped and sized like a woman, split vertically down the middle, hollow inside except for the spikes. The woman died impaled and asphyxiated. If they were about to put me in that thing, would I not name my sister, my daughter, my mother? I don't know. I don't know. And that is the worst torture of all. I must be quiet. If I don't teach my craft to my granddaughter, it will die with me. But if I do teach her, she will die. I must be silent. The burning times were femicide. Our Wounded Knee, our Holocaust, our Khmer Rouge. The systematic imprisonment, torture, and murder of the traditional healers and spiritual leaders, the witches, was the final blow in Christianity's war on indigenous European spirituality, on our connection to the earth and divine feminine. My ancestors once knew the web, once sat in circle, connected to each other, the rest of creation, Mother Earth. They worshipped divine mysteries that couldn't be trapped in one gender, whose gender wouldn't grant demigod status to some men and exploitation to the rest of us. Europeans were once part of the great web. The loss of that created a people who would land on Pilgrim Rock as illegal aliens and invaders and repay the generosity and hospitality they found there with a massacre of the people who just saved their lives. A people who were unwilling and unable to learn from the people they met here. A people with the audacity to claim to have discovered this already occupied land. If they had been willing to listen, they might have heard a very different story about a woman and a garden and the beginning. Like this Haudenosaunee Iroquois creation myth, Sky Woman Falling, which I tell gratefully with permission. She fell like a maple seed in the autumn breeze. A sudden shaft of light came through from the sky world where there had only been darkness before. She fell a long time. It took a long time. In fear, maybe hope, she held a bundle tightly in one hand. Looking down, she could only see dark water. But in that darkness, many eyes were looking at this sudden light and the tiny speck there that, as she grew closer, they could see was a woman. Arms outstretched, black hair billowing behind her as she spiraled toward them. The geese nodded at each other and rose in a wave of goose music to stop her fall. Far from the only home she'd ever known, she caught her breath on the warmth and softness of those feathers as they gently brought her down. The geese could not hold the woman above the water much longer, so they called a council. Resting on their wings, she saw them come, otter, beaver, swan, loon, fish of all kinds. A great turtle floated in their midst. "Put her on my back," he said. Gratefully, she stepped from the goose wings onto the back of that turtle. Now, the animals understood the woman needed land for her home and determined they would help. The strongest divers among them had heard of mud at the bottom of this water. They decided they'd find some. Loon dove first and was gone a long time, but returned empty-handed. One by one, the others went. Otter, beaver, even sturgeon. But the depth, the darkness, and the pressures were too great. One by one, they returned, gasping for air, with their heads ringing. Some didn't return at all. At last, only little muskrat was left, the weakest diver of all. He volunteered. His legs flailing, he went under the water. The rest waited anxiously for their relative. And indeed, after a long time, a nest of bubbles arose holding the limp body of the muskrat. He'd given his life to aid this helpless human. But then, when they looked at his paw, they saw it was clenched, and when they opened it, there was a dab of mud. "Put it on my back," Turtle said. Sky Woman bent over to spread it carefully across the back of Turtle. So grateful to those animals, she sang in gratitude, and then she began to dance. As her feet caressed the earth, it grew and grew until from the back of that turtle, the whole world was made. Not by Sky Woman alone, but by the alchemy of the animal's amazing gifts combined with her deep gratitude. Now, like all good guests, Sky Woman had not come empty-handed. She still had that turtle. When she fell through the hole in the sky world, she reached out to the tree of life that grows there. She had branches with seeds and fruit, all kinds of plants. These she planted and tended carefully. This light still came through that hole in the sky world, enabling them to flourish. Grasses, flowers, trees, all kinds of medicines. And now that the animals had plenty to eat there, many of them came to live with Sky Woman on Turtle Island, our home. Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer is Potawatomi. She grew up hearing stories like that. She carries them with her when she goes into her laboratory and classrooms as a botany professor, whose specialty is the study of mosses. One day she gets a letter inviting her to visit a reproduction or a production of a native plant garden in Appalachia. Driving from dawn to get there on time, she has 4 minutes to spare when she gets behind a slow-moving tree. trees that big can't be moved. When she finally arrives at what looks like a military compound, she sees dozens of men working at a frenzied pace and speaking to each other in Spanish. She's turned over to a young man smiling shyly. Matt reminds her immediately of her students. Here's why we need your help. I can't keep the mosses alive on the rocks in the garden where the owner wants it so it'll look old. As they pass a brand new house, she notices it looks like an old manor surrounded by ancient trees the size of that oak she followed. I didn't think you could buy trees that big. You can't. We buy the land and dig them up. We haven't lost one yet. But I can't keep the mosses alive. I have to keep going back to the forest to get more. As she's explaining to Matt the ethics of wild gathering, the immense complexity of moss ecosystems, why it takes hundreds of years for moss communities to grow, her eyes fall on a rock in the garden covered with beautiful mosses, but to a botanist's eye, all wrong. Species where they are on the rock, just not right. How did you get them to grow like that? It's very unusual. Superglued it. Turning off the radio that tracked his every move, Matt takes her to his favorite place. A glen in the garden covered with glacier-polished boulders. The glen has glacier-polished boulders that are covered by ancient mosses. This is what the owner wants. I brought him here a whole bunch. He loves it. Wanting to help Matt, she gives him a gardener's recipe for a milkshake of blended mosses and buttermilk sloshed on rocks without much faith in its effectiveness before she leaves. She's surprised to get an invitation to come back a year later to see her progress, but she does want to check in with Matt. Upon her arrival, he is nowhere to be seen, but she's shown a sculpted rock with beautiful native moss. Maybe I need to rethink the effectiveness of that milkshake. But then she's put in a Jeep and learns why she was summoned. She finds herself in the midst of a blasting crew, with a charming Irishman saying, "They're dining in transport, you see, and the owner doesn't want to waste the money." She knows exactly where she is. It's the beautiful glen. The owner is destroying it to decorate his native plant garden. They take her to a huge white tent that reminds her of a field hospital where misters and hormone sprayers are tending to the ailing mosses on the blasted slabs of granite. So which ones will survive a transplant then? I am now an accomplice. Which is the greater evil? To be sold as a thing or to be left to die? She wants to confront the owner, but he's invisible. No one will say anything about him beyond the fact that he is a very wealthy man. She doesn't really remember what she said, but she hopes it would say them all. She asks, what does it mean to own a thing? A special, a wild and living being? I think you can't own something and love it at the same time. I am moss. We mosses are small. That's how we survive. That's how we've survived for millions of years. Being small, it's easy to have enough. Enough water, enough sunlight, enough minerals, enough space. Staying small, taking little, we made possible those bigger, showier plants that evolved cones, flowers, and fruits. We have survived not just for ourselves, but so we can provide oxygen for every breathing being on the planet. Give food to the animals directly and indirectly by creating soil from the rocks we grow on. We are your ancient relatives. With our cousins, the lichen, we pioneered leaving the ocean womb for the barren rock of dry land. Every living being that came after us owes their lives to our work. Listen to us. Learn from us. Love us. Here's the thing we learned. One moss is an oxymoron. We are community. Living together in a dance of competition and cooperation that helps each other thrive. Reciprocity, giving and receiving, begins with gratitude. Be grateful to every being in the web of life that makes your life possible. Two-leggeds, your species is a newborn. You have so much to learn from those of us evolution has been teaching for millions of years how to live together. Your arrogance and ignorance will take many with you if you destroy our home. Be right-sized. Be conscious of what you take. Find a way to give back. Let respect be your guide. Listen. Learn. Love. Dr. Kimmerer's lack of enthusiasm for the owner's plans earns her a rapid escort to the boundary. But there she meets Matt, who's waiting for her because he has something he wants her to see. The compound is surrounded by a high electric fence, angled out to thwart deer and other wildlife. The owner has had Roundup sprayed at the base of the fence. Nothing grows there. No grass, flower, nothing except mosses. Immune to the poison, they have taken over in a crazy quilt of green. What if we've been getting Eve's story wrong all these years? Visionary futurist Barbara Marx Hubbard thinks that myth is about our species' evolution from animal to human consciousness. From our awareness of our unity in the eternal now, to learning about our unique individuality, linear time, and therefore our mortality. She thinks it's the feminine in all of us that reaches for the fruit of the next thing in evolution. And that it's the feminine in all of us who needs to reach now for the fruit of re-recognizing our unity within the eternal now, without losing our sense of unique individuality or history the last 6,000 years or so under patriarchy has been a kind of species adolescence. Learning how to live as individuals. It's time to evolve towards human adulthood, leaving behind our adolescent rebellion and arrogance and moving towards humility, gratitude, reciprocity, and respect. Euro-American culture has so come to dominate the world that we've all been pulled into this prickly adolescence, with or without consent. Indigenous cultures never lacked for individuation, though they remained within the web. The most democratic societies I've ever heard of were First Nations of the Western Hemisphere, where individuals could opt out of a decision made by consensus if their consciences so told them. And where respect for elders, women, and children is of the deepest and highest order. But we've all been made to be part of this stunted adolescent worldview. Now this is where I have to make a disclaimer. I am not saying the world would be saved if every white person became a neo-pagan tomorrow. In fact, my heart has been broken since learning recently that white supremacists have co-opted European pagan spirituality because they figured out that Viking runes get them further than swastikas when recruiting angry young white men in this country. It just goes to show this stunted adolescence can cloak itself in anything and bring evil there. If you don't believe me, ask the radical Rebbe from Nazareth about the KKK. If we are to evolve fast enough to survive, we must reach for the fruit of recognition of our unity as a species, but also the fruit of recognizing our ignorance as a species, of how desperately we need to learn from our relatives who've been taught by evolution for millions of years how to live together. Listen to the mosses. Be right-sized. Be conscious of what you take and find a way to give back. Be grateful and let respect guide you. What would a genuine spirituality that honored the sacred web and divine feminine without cultural appropriation look like? Humility, gratitude, reciprocity, respect. Say it with me. Humility, gratitude, reciprocity, respect. That's how the web of life was originally woven. That's how we'll reweave it. May we do so in time. Blessed be.